Senators before them. Coming up on the program, I'll be talking to the Manager of Opposition Business in the Senate, Liberal Senator Mitch Fifield. Also, Labor frontbencher Richard Marles will be joining me. First, though, let's hear from one of the senior members of the Greens, the Deputy Greens leader and the spokesperson on climate change, Senator Christine Milne. I spoke to her a short time ago. Senator Milne, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Petrol accounts, that sector, for 17% of Australia's carbon emissions. That must have been hard for you and the Greens to accept, to exclude that.
Yes, that's right. Everybody is aware the Greens think we need a broad-based emissions trading scheme, and that with transport emissions being as they are, we need to bring them down. However, the country independents, particularly Tony Windsor, felt very strongly about keeping fuel out. And so the Greens agreed that we would get a Productivity Commission inquiry into the whole issue of fuel excise, because what we'd like to see is the fuel excise move to start charging for the embedded energy in fuel, so that motorists have a very clear signal. If you buy a certain car with a certain level of efficiency, it will rely on a fuel that will cost you more if it has more embedded energy.
Before we get to that, I do want to ask you about that review by the Productivity Commission, but on exempting fuel in the first place, how hard did the Greens fight to keep it in?
Well, the Greens have a very strong view about trying to maximise the effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but as we've said all along, this is a negotiation. There's the Labor Party, the Independents, the Greens. In order to get a package, we all have to compromise on various parts of it. I went into it knowing that. When we set up the Multi-Party Climate Committee, we knew there would be a negotiation and there'd be compromises, and we worked through that. We're keeping our eye on the big picture here. We want to deliver an emissions trading scheme for Australia by the 1st of July next year, and we will. Okay,
heavy commercial vehicles, apparently, trucks and so on, big business will not have their fuel costs exempt. How will that work? And is that something that the Greens argued for?
Well, the whole package will be released when it's signed off. The government chose to make part of the fuel package public at the weekend, so we'll have to wait for the detail. But
to have the heavy commercial vehicles obviously not exempt, that would be something that the Greens had prosecuted in the multi-party committee.
Well, suffice to say, Kieran, we want to see transport emissions come down. We want to see the push away from wasteful use of resources. We want to see higher levels of efficiency. Now, that is a view that we've prosecuted always, and certainly we've prosecuted it in the committee, but the whole package will be made available as soon as it's signed off.
Does that make it a little bit more palatable, though, that the heavy vehicles will be paying this cost?
Well, what is the outcome for us is the whole package. We're getting a carbon price signal, we're getting it in various ways across the economy, and as you know, having pushed for getting rid of the fringe benefits tax concession in the budget for excess use of motor vehicles, having moved now on getting a review of the excise, we've always argued for better efficiency standards in vehicles and more investment in public transport. We've pushed for a whole range of things, obviously.
Okay, on that review, the Productivity Commission review into the fuel excise regime, is it your hope that at the end of that, when it reports in 3 years, that there will be another look at this and that fuel will then be included in the carbon pricing scheme, in the emissions trading scheme beyond 2015?
Well, it's difficult to see how it will be included in an emissions trading scheme, with both the Labor Party and the Coalition saying that they would not include it. But what I would hope out of a fuel excise is that instead of fuel excise being seen just as a revenue raiser for government, the fuel excise will take into account the embedded energy in the fuel and the fact that it's a fossil fuel, and that the excise will be adjusted accordingly. So the price signals that come out of that will, in effect, look at the scarcity of the resource, as in oil, and then the level of emissions, and that excises will be set accordingly. But that will be up to the Productivity Commission and up to the stakeholder engagement.
Reports today that the Greens have secured a multi-billion-dollar clean energy fund, what's been described as complementary measures. We know that you've been pushing for big investments in renewables. Is this report accurate? Well, and was it a concession for you agreeing to having petrol exempt?
Well, as I said, this is a package, and unlike what the Rudd government did before, which was to rely on an emissions trading scheme as just the silver bullet, What we've said this time is there needs to be a package which has in it an emissions trading scheme, but it also has a range of complementary measures, because we know that the price won't be high enough to drive the rollout of large-scale renewables in the time frame that we need them. So certainly we have pushed for not only an emissions trading scheme but a broad package, and that'll be released later in the week.
But you're happy with the result, obviously?
Well, we're signing off the detail, and I think that the Greens are going to be central to delivering what is a major change in the way that we live our lives in Australia, if you like, because this will be the first time that we have broad-based carbon pricing, and Australians, I think, are going to really get behind it because they want action on climate change, they want emissions to come down, and they want clean energy to be made cheaper.
Are the Greens being more pragmatic, do you think, this time around than your party was under Kevin Rudd's emissions trading scheme negotiations, which, of course, the Greens knocked off?
Well, we weren't involved in those negotiations at all. At no stage did Kevin Rudd come and talk to the Greens ever. Not once during that whole period. He made a decision to negotiate with the coalition and to negotiate backwards, further and further towards the fossil fuel sector. What the Greens said at the time was it locked in failure. It kept the level of ambition down and made it almost impossible for Australia to ratchet up its effort. I've said this time we have to have flexibility for upward engagement, so that whatever we do, it's a platform for something better. Just as the Productivity Commission inquiry is a platform for something better, what we want is upward flexibility. Okay,
and the final deal by the end of the week? When's the multi-party committee meeting again, and can we expect an announcement soon after that?
Well, certainly we are meeting later in the week, and we're in the home straight. And I'll be very keen when we get the whole thing signed off and be able to go out and tell Australians in its entirety, not just in bits.
Would you expect by the weekend?
Well, we're certainly working on getting this as soon as possible.
All right, and one last question on the Senate balance of power. A new era for the Greens today. Obviously, the coalition seems to be relishing this because they believe that the government will be seen to be even more beholden to the Greens, that Bob Brown is dictating the terms. Does your party need to be sensitive to those accusations by the coalition and that perception that the government is being driven by the Greens' agenda?
Well, the coalition would be extremely foolish to take that view, because what balance of power politics means is that any two of those parties can make change. The coalition can decide to run a negative agenda and try and win that political argument, or it can decide to work with the Greens for positive outcomes, because now it has got within its grasp the capacity to deliver on policy. So which is it going to be? Is Tony Abbott going to continue with his negative political strategy, or is he going to deliver for coalition voters? Now that is a challenge to him, and I hope that will be the first thing he announces when he goes out to a petrol station today to tell people that he was totally wrong, that the petrol is not included in the emissions trading scheme, and that is just the first of many apologies coming up.
Senator Milne, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Stay with us after the break on AM Agenda. I'll be joined by Labor frontbencher Richard Marles and Liberal Senator Mitch Fifield.